G'day, it's Paul Roos here from Performance by Design, and welcome to the Culture Couch. Today's a special edition. Well, every edition's great because I get to share it with one of my partners. Today, Emil Studham, but really great mate of mine, Dave Misson, who came on the journey with me at the Sydney Swans and was just absolutely pivotal in the success that we had. And then I teamed up with him again at Melbourne, which was fantastic. But rather than me, Misso, give a big intro, just maybe go back pre-cricket, Sydney Swans, because we're going to go through that journey anyway, but give yourself a bit of an introduction and tell the listeners a bit about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Rizzy. Look, I started as a secondary school teacher and knew that that's not where I wanted to end up. And I tried a whole lot of different things. I did a radio announcers course, I did a direct marketing course, and was really unsure as to what I wanted to do. And like many times in my life, I turned to my wife and said, "What do you think?" And she said, "Well, I think you should follow your passion." And my passion was sport. So I went down the line of, doing some study in sports science and ended up having a little consultancy where I had a few different clients, Rugby New South Wales, a bit of tennis, track and field. And then I applied for a job with the Australian cricket team as their full-time physical performance manager. And that just set me on the road then. I travelled with them for 3 years full-time, had to get off the road because I had 2 young children and my wife wanted to go back to work, and was lucky enough to get a role at the Swans, and that started my AFL journey, and was with you guys for 8 years. And then my wife got her dream job down in Melbourne, and, we all went down there, and I jumped in with one of our good mates, Rossi Lyon at St Kilda, until he went over to Fremantle, and then joined the Melbourne Footy Club, where again I linked up with you, and that was sort of really 20 years worth of AFL. But probably, as they say, I didn't work a day in my life because you get up every morning and you just love being involved.
Yeah, I love the idea about passion. I mean, it's something you've got kids similar age to mine, Miss, and we're always talking about people finding their passion, and so much about what we do is talking about purpose or passion, however you want to call it. Let's start at cricket, because it's a fascinating industry to everyone that probably hasn't spent a lot of time, which I haven't. The first question, we'll ask 2 questions. Tell us about their culture when you were there, and it's obviously changed dramatically, but is it more of an individual sport than a team sport? So sort of 2 questions in one, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think so. When I first came in, there was still a hint of what I'd call the seniority culture, where, the leaders were the guys who had played 50 test matches, 60 test matches, been around the team for 3, 4, 5 years, and the young guys coming in were expected to serve their time. And I was lucky enough to come in at a really significant time when Steve Waugh took over as captain of both the one-day team and the test team. And it was also a time where they started picking different squads for each of those forms of the game. And Stephen really had it in his mind that he wanted every player who either came into the one-day or the test team to feel that they could contribute, whether they'd played 1 game or 100 games, because he'd been subjected to that culture where he was asked to basically not say anything for 3 or 4 years until he'd served his time. And he felt that if you're good enough to play for Australia, then you're good enough to make a contribution to the team with regard to strategy and culture and all that sort of stuff. So, I was so blessed and privileged to be part of that era in Australian cricket where, Stephen really pushed the whole connection. We went on tours where he got guys up telling their stories. We had a situation in the 99 World Cup where I ended up being the poet laureate. I'd nominate a player and they'd have to, write their own poem and say it to the boys in the warm-up before a game. But, really just showing a bit of themselves. But it just served to really bring the team together, connect the team. And, when the pressure was on and when high performance was required, they knew they could rely on each other.
Yeah, it was interesting. One of the things you brought to the Swans, which was fantastic, was that tell a football story, but tell us something about yourself. I think we had Eamon Buchanan at a potato shooter that he shot across the SCG. We had Benny Fixture's guitar playing at one stage.
Yeah.
And was it Heath James, Ryan Fitzgerald's wallet incident down at Coogee, which I'm not going to expand on. So we had some interesting times. I want to just touch on the captain picking the team and the differences, the dramatic difference between cricket and most other sport, or all other sports really, where the captain is effectively the coach and also the chairman of selectors and picks the team. Run us through that dynamic and how that plays out within the cricket team.
Yeah, I think that, there's an historical belief that the captain does run the team. And even when, you had Bob Simpson, who was a really successful coach, Jeff Marsh, who I worked under, and John Buchanan, there was still a feeling that they were there simply just to guide the team, to organise training, to discuss with the captain what the strategy was going to be. But essentially, the captain ran the team. That started changing a little bit, I felt, towards the end of my time with the team, where, the senior players and the captain in particular really trusted the coach and understood that they couldn't do everything, that they had to do media. They were on the field making all the decisions. They were in the change rooms running meetings. And there was a belief that, we need to bring some other people inside the tent here to help us out. And if the coach is good enough to coach the Australian cricket team, he's good enough to help with strategy and, help with setting the direction of the team. So again, my time with them was a great time because it started turning and there were important contributions from people other than the captain.
That's awesome. Such good insight. The other thing that I wanted to touch back a little bit on was the Steve Waugh concept around creating an environment for others to participate. And you touched on safety, which is really important. We talk a lot about creating a safe environment, and we pride ourselves on doing that. How important in the teams that have been successful, that environment of feeling safe, how important was that to success and the teams that maybe didn't get the success that they wanted,
Yeah, it's absolutely critical. And I know, we talk about real talk in performance by design. And I think the capacity in the teams that I've been involved with, I've been so lucky that they've been, guided by, I suppose, a culture where values and behaviours are at the forefront.
Yeah, right.
And if you've got that, you still need to have the capacity to give and receive honest feedback.
Yeah.
And, from a cricket point of view, and especially with the Swans, that was a critical piece of why we were so successful. The ability of not just coaches but teammates to provide feedback to each other, not just to give the feedback but to also receive it and receive it in the right way, in that it's not personal, it's all about making the team better.
Yeah.
And if that's the understanding, then, the team can absolutely move forward exponentially because you just get such growth.
Yeah. So this is great. So we've been talking a fair bit about sport and the dynamic there. Let's merge the two together now, because we spend a lot of our time obviously in the corporate space. What are some of those universal principles that you've seen that translate beautifully into building teams, whether it be sport or corporate?
Well, I think, Emil, having an environment, and you mentioned it, that is safe, an environment where people can feel that they can share their story, share their journey, because that just provides a platform for people to open up and to be themselves. And as I say, to be able to give and receive feedback, and to, that's where you get real development and real growth. So I think first and foremost, that's just critical, whether you're working with an elite team, with a corporate, with a school group, it doesn't matter. People need to feel safe in the environment where they're providing and giving of themselves. I think the second thing, and it's a thing that probably struck me most about the Swans, is having that system, having that structure that everyone knew existed. Our players ran out every single week knowing exactly what was required of them. And importantly, we reflected on that every Monday, and that was reviewed and honed and, made better for the next week. And that's exactly the same in a corporate environment. Having that system, having that structure that you can fall back on if things are going bad, or, like we are in, COVID-19 at the moment, having a situation where you just fall back on that system of values and behaviours that you can assess yourselves on, but more importantly, move forward.
So, Misso, you've gone for cricket to Sydney, as you alluded to, and I don't think we've ever really sat down and talked about the Swans, even though we spent a lot of time together. As you said, you moved to Melbourne with Catherine and the job that she got, and et cetera, et cetera. But through your eyes, take the listeners on that journey, because I talk about it, and I hope I'm right when I do, but I'm only looking through my eyes and how it saw from a coach's point of view. So the guys just come from cricket, come to Sydney, you've come under Rodney Eade, even that transition period, but also, you know, when we set up this initially, from your eyes, who were sort of in the tent, but a little bit distant, so you could observe and watch and see, et cetera, et cetera. Can you take the listeners through that whole process?
Yeah, so I suppose, you know, for me, sitting in the high performance and medical team, you know, the coaching team was really tight-knit, a very, very good coaching team. But I think the thing that stood out initially is that we were really valued. So across the business, and, you know, you call the football department a business, but, you know, you transpose it to the corporate sphere as well. Critical parts of the business were really valued. And, you know, you guys valued the high performance and medical team, you know, and it was probably a feature of 205, 206 is that, you know, we had pretty low injury rates. Our players are pretty resilient. So it's that combination of valuing the really important aspects of the business, you know, and we felt valued as our high performance and medical team first and foremost. I think to me, and I've sort of alluded to it, the second one is that there was such a clear direction for both players and staff as to what the expectations were from a performance point of view. And, you know, our great mate, Benny Matthews, who we spent a fair bit of time with at Melbourne, you know, I speak to him about that a lot, is that every time the Swans players ran out on the ground, they knew exactly what the expectation was with regard to the role they needed to play. Mm. And they didn't need to deviate from that role. They didn't need to, you know, chase individual glory. It was all about team first. And they all knew that if they played their role, then they get the success that they all strive for. Mm. And to me, those were two of the biggest things, Roosie, I reckon. And yeah, and I think again, you know, they're critical to success in any area.
Is there any specific meetings or times or games that really stand out for you, where you know, and I look back on and probably pick some, but you sort of thought, gee, this really works. You know, we've really got it at this footy club. You know, we're really heading somewhere. Is there anything that really stands out for you through that period of, you know, 2-3, 2-4 prior to winning the premiership in 2005?
I think my favourite story is round 22 in 2005. So we're playing Hawthorn, who are sitting last on the ladder. We've already secured a top 4 spot. Barry Hall's only 2 goals behind Fraser Gehrig in the race for the Coleman medal, and we're playing the last place team. So there's a feeling that, you know, Baz could win the Coleman medal. So he needs 4 goals to beat Fraser. He kicks 2 in the first quarter. We end up winning the game by 80 points. And for the other 3 quarters, his players are kicking the ball to him, trying to line him up for goals. But he makes a conscious decision not to kick any more goals. He takes a mark in the goal square and kicks backwards to one of his teammates. He'll dish off, you know, handballs so that someone else can get goals. And I vividly remember going into the locker room after that game and listening to players talking about not what Barry said or anything like that, but what he did on the field. He made it so obvious that it wasn't about individual accolades and awards. He didn't want the Coleman medal. He wanted he wanted team success. And I thought that was so powerful, and I thought it had such an effect on the playing group. And it was really a meaningless game. We won by 80 points. We already secured a top 4. But the statement that he made, and as a leader, you know, that action that he took was so significant, I reckon.
Yeah. It's interesting. Those that have watched The Last Dance, and anyone that hasn't, I'd really encourage that, because you're 100% right, Mister. I talk about the Swans players leaving their egos in the locker and their ability to just leave the egos in the locker room and go out and play their role. But The Last Dance, Michael Jordan, who I think's clearly the best basketball player of all time, and there's the moment in that where you can see that Phil Jackson explains to him, your role is to make everyone else better. Yeah. And in that moment, I think the Sydney players realised that as good a player Barry Hall was, he was only there to make everyone else better. And that was the message he sent, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely.
What you've explained there in the Barry Hall story is, you know, a term we use a lot around role modelling leadership. You know, you used the conversation in the lockers wasn't about what he said, but what he did. And we talk, that's something that we work very diligently on in the corporate sector, and helping leaders understand the way you show up often is the way that your team will feel through your behaviours. Right now, leaders, particularly in the corporate sector, are being judged and scrutinised more than ever before. So through your experience and all this time in sport, and also some of your work in the corporate space, what are some of the really important things that you would recommend or advise leaders to do given today's current situation?
I think when you talk about leadership, and I come back to the great Neil Danaher's comment that he makes a lot is, when it's all said and done, more is said than done, and you're judged on what you do and not on what you say. And I think, especially in times of crisis like this and under adversity, that's how leaders are going to be judged, not just universally by society if you're a politician, but internally by an organisation, who are looking to you in these times for what you're doing as opposed to what you're saying. But in saying that, there's an understanding that as a leader, you don't have to know everything, and you don't have to do everything yourself. You don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And it is about trying, still in times of crisis and under adversity, still trying to make other people better, trying to get people to rise to an occasion. Yeah. So it's providing, that encouragement, providing that opportunity and that advice, but also being really decisive when you need to. But essentially, at the end of the day, being judged by what you do.
Yeah, look, we're super excited to have you on our team now, Dave, over here in Toronto. You're currently completing a Masters of Leadership, which is exciting, and we had a little chat before the show. You're getting right into it. Can you just give us some insights to your new learnings there that also might be useful for our listeners today?
I think the biggest takeaway I've got from doing this is that leadership is a skill, and it's a learned skill, and it's something that can be developed. I think a lot in sport and look, probably in business as well, is that people start in a technical role, and they have expertise in that technical aspect of their role, and as they progress, it's just assumed that they can lead because they're really skillful in the technical aspect.
Yeah.
But they're not provided with any leadership training.
Yeah.
And that's probably the biggest thing that I've come to realise, studying leadership, is that it is a skill, and it needs to be honed, and it needs to be developed. And importantly, it needs to be studied both historically and, a contemporary study of leadership to understand where it's come from, and importantly, how you can develop as a leader, because everyone's different. But there's some real basic tenets of leadership that, if people develop those and adhere to those, can be a leader in any sphere, whether it's corporate, sport, whatever.
I think on that, so too, you went from Sydney to St Kilda, and a great mate of ours and a great mate of mine, Rossi Lime, very different personality to me. But
Yep.
what on that, tell us about the St Kilda experience, tell us about some of the great leaders there, but also tell us about the similarities and the slight differences, because I agree with you. Ross Lyon's not going to be Paul Roos. Paul Roos is not going to be Ross Lyon, or Alistair Clarkson or John Longmire. What are the differences? Because you have to be yourself. But what are the real similarities you saw at the St Kilda Football Club that you come from? With Steve Waugh, with Stewie Maxfield, I suspect at Sydney, who was our captain. Similarities and the slight differences as well.
Yeah, look, first and foremost, you walk into St Kilda and there's great leaders. There's Nick Rewalt, there's Lenny Hayes, and Ross as well. And Ross was a young coach, when I joined up with him. But, as you know, he's a very strong character. He's got great technical knowledge of the game. But I think more importantly, his EQ is outstanding. And he was a hard ass, and he was, he probably delivered a much more severe spray than you ever did, Roosie, but on many occasions. But, if a player had a personal problem, he'd be the first person they'd go to, because he had such empathy for his players. He really understood them, and importantly, he knew how to get them. Again, he was someone who, if there was an issue, he didn't feel that he was always going to be the smartest person in the room. And invariably he would get players like Rewalt and Hayes and Stephen Baker and Stephen Milne, those really experienced players who knew the game back to front to help him, to advise him. And he freely admitted a lot of time, boys, I don't have the answer here, but I'm going to ask a lot of questions and I'm going to get some advice and we're going to find a solution. And over and above the systems and structures that he had in place there, which was, again, all about values and behaviours. But it was a really great environment.
And then moving through your transition from St Kilda and then going to the Melbourne Football Club. And I find it uncomfortable a lot talking about Melbourne, because you don't like to be critical, but more general without mentioning names. What are the biggest mistakes the poor leaders have made? What are the things where you've sat back, having been involved in great cultures at cricket and football, and you've been really frustrated with and just can't understand why is this happening? Why is this leader doing this?
Well, I think the biggest mistake of leadership is if you put a system in place where everyone else is measured by, the values that you put in place and then more importantly, the behaviours that you exhibit. If your leaders don't exhibit those behaviours, how can they be called leaders?
Yeah.
And the system just totally breaks down. And I'm not saying that happened a lot at Melbourne, but there were times where, that's what did happen. Mm. And unfortunately, because of the culture we probably inherited at Melbourne, there weren't a lot of leaders within the playing group. Yeah. Nathan Jones was a one-man band for a lot of years, holding that team together and carrying it on his back. And then he was expected to be this great team leader. And, I don't think he was given the support. And I talk about, leadership being a skill. Perhaps, he really needed to be given a lot of support and encouragement about what great leaders are. But I think that's the most critical thing is if your leaders aren't exhibiting the behaviours that everyone else has agreed on is going to take you forward with regard to your performance, what hope have you got?
Yeah. It's a great point, Misson, because I did a podcast the other day and we talked about, and they asked me about two of the great leaders. And I spoke about, and I find, as I'm sure you two do, Emile, as well, it's hard when people say, he's the next captain of the club as a reporter. It's garbage because there's no way known externally to a football club or even a business you can tell who the great leaders are. You have to be internal. And I spoke about Stewie Maxfield first, and I said, look, Stewie just took to it like a duck to water. He just said, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead. But he had that 10 weeks in the coach's box prior to me taking over. He was my assistant because he was injured. But I also talked about Nathan Jones because it's a really good point. His transition was incredible. Like from that person that really was thrown into a role on the back of Jack Grimes and Jack Trengo, no skill set. And it was really I because you get your ass kicked every single week and you think about yourself. But he generally wanted to be better and he generally wanted to the team to be better. Maybe through your eyes, talk about his transition because it was quite dramatic over certainly my 3 years at the football club.
Yep. I think it's really hard as a sportsman who's been used to measuring success on how many touches do I get. My performance is the thing that's going to get my team across the line or not. So if that's your DNA, it's so hard to change. Whereas, I remember Brett Kirk started, his AFL career as a tagger and became such a good player that he got tagged himself. And as you know, he would love a player coming to him at the start of the game and him taking that player to the goal square. Yeah. That would be the best result in his eye because he said, well, if I get 5 touches, I don't care. But Benny Matthews is going to get 30 because their best midfielder is sitting on me in the goal square.
Yeah.
So it was all about what can I do for the team? And what I can do for the team mightn't necessarily be great for me. But if the team wins, then it doesn't really matter. And I think that goes back to the Jordan one, where Phil Jackson sits him down and says, look, you're not going to be the highest scoring player in the league. I'm telling you that now. But we could win a championship by bringing other people into the game and making them better.
Yeah.
And I think the tears that he was shedding when they won their first championship shows how, what was the important thing to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff. This has been a great couch session, but let's move a little bit over to the corporate space, if that's okay. You've joined our team as a performance designer, and we're certainly excited about that. And resetting everything here in Toronto now that we've got a lot of our programming updated and our softwares and so forth. What excites you most about your transition into the performance by design system and doing more work now in the corporate sector?
Yeah, look, I've got a little story to hopefully exhibit that. But a week before lockdown, my wife and I went to New York, and probably my oldest friend in the world, a guy that I was friends with since kindergarten in primary school, so over 40 years. He's been working with Macquarie Bank in New York for 25 years. So he's a director up there. So we catch up with him, for dinner with him and his wife when we're in New York. And he had a family tragedy, a significant family tragedy when he was young, that really obviously shook him. And, we spoke about that at dinner, and he was explaining, because, coronavirus was on the horizon, and it was obvious that things were going to happen there. I said, how are you going to go with this? And he said, well, look, coronavirus, the GFC and the markets, the downturn in the market, when things are going bad, it's amazing how my mindset just goes to when things, when I had that issue when we were younger. And I just go into survival mode and I go into fix-it mode. And so to me, it just made me realise there are so many stories and journeys that I'm looking forward to sharing with people in the corporate area. When you're with a footy team, there's probably only 40 stories, with players and some staff as well. But I think it's the stories and, the journey that we can hopefully encourage people to share with, safe environments, because I think once people do open up, that just lays the platform for such a great learning and developing environment and high-performing environment as well. And that's what I'm really excited about.
Yeah, love it.
Oh, mate, look, it's been an amazing chat, and I knew it'd be fun because you and I have shared so much of the journey together. And I want to finish off with ego, because Misso probably typifies for me what you don't want to see in a leader. And he doesn't have a huge ego. And I think at Sydney, and you touched on it, Misso, we had a group of guys and no one was clamouring for the spotlight. No one said I was better than you and you were better than me. And I think what you've achieved over the journey has been exceptional, but you've never cried out for – it drives me mad when I see these people that have done nothing, and you hear them on the radio or you see them in the paper, and they're almost trying to create their image through their own self-promotion. And again, I think one of the great things about the great teams that you and I have worked with is that clearly there's egos, but the ego doesn't outweigh the team.
Yeah.
And I think if I was to talk to you, Misso, about the type of leader you have been, and I'll ask you as well, but just no ego, do what I have to do, expert in his field, understand his role, play his role really well, and contribute significantly to the team. How would you like to be remembered yourself by the players, whether they're cricket players, players at Melbourne, players at St Kilda, players at Sydney?
Yeah, look, exactly that. And I think, it's something that I got from my parents, my father in particular, who played Test cricket for Australia. He reinforced to me that a team is about, a group of individuals working together, and it's not about, one person being the absolute standout. So play your role. If you play your role well enough, then you're going to keep getting jobs. If you play your role well enough, then hopefully, people around you are going to step up and be better. And that's something that I've really sort of taken with me. I think how I'd like to be remembered, again, talking to Benny Matthews before I came up here over a beer, he reminded me of a session we did, I think it was before the 2006 final series, and he was injured, had a bad ankle, and he needed to do a rehab session to prove to you and the coaches that he was ready to play finals. And he said, I remember it was a Sunday morning. I brought our youngest daughter, Bella, to the SCG, and we ran Benny through a rehab session. He said, I vividly remember you giving up your time on a Sunday morning, bringing your family out when you could have been down the beach or something like that. And that's the sort of stuff I'd like to be remembered for, playing my role, doing whatever I could to help the team sort of get up and functioning, because that's what it's all about. At the end of the day, everyone shares in the glory if the team wins, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, great way to finish, mate. Absolutely. And look, you're incredibly well placed. We're excited to have you on board. You're incredibly well placed to experience both from a practical point of view and now from an educational point of view and doing your study as well. Couldn't be a better place. Your experience has been exceptional. I think you've summed yourself up really well. So, mate, thanks very much. Great chatting to you on the Culture Couch. Emil, well done again. We're signing off until next time. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.